Welcome back. Premiers from across Canada are in Halifax today and tomorrow, meeting at a time when the provinces and Ottawa are at odds on some key issues. Provinces including Alberta, Saskatchewan and Manitoba are calling for the same 3-year federal carbon tax exemption on home heating oil to apply to natural gas. Saskatchewan is even threatening to stop collecting the carbon tax on heating by January unless the feds offer an exemption. In recent days, Alberta is also facing tough questions on its proposal to leave the Canada Pension Plan, which the feds have voiced strong opposition to. Ontario also doesn't support that move. For more on what the premiers are prepared to take on Ottawa over, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe is with me now. Hi, Premier Moe. Good to have you back on the program. Thanks for making the time.
Well, thank you, Bessie.
Premier, last week you said that if the federal government doesn't bend on carve-outs for natural gas or other heating sources, basically beyond heating oil, that you and your government as of January will stop collecting it. I just want to play for you the federal finance minister's response late last week to that threat, and then I'll get your reaction to it. Let's have a listen to Minister Freeland.
It is entirely appropriate, and I think an expectation shared by all Canadians, that everyone in the country should follow the law. That's our expectation, and it's our job to ensure that the law is enforced. It will be.
Premier, does the minister have a point? Does doing something illegal here really solve anything?
I would say that we're going to follow the law. Very shortly, there's going to be a law in Saskatchewan that will state that we won't be submitting the carbon tax on how we heat our homes with natural gas to the federal government. And I would say we're also following the law of thermodynamics, as heat pumps simply don't work in the climate across the prairie provinces. And so there are multiple laws in this space. Very shortly, there will be another law in place in Saskatchewan, and that's the law that we are going to follow.
But with all due respect, I take your point on the piece of legislation that you're going to pass, but there is a way in which this country works, right? That you collect a tax on behalf of the federal government, or vice versa, that the federal government collects some of their taxes on behalf of the provincial government. I mean, is this the most responsible thing to do, to start off on, and I get your concerns. I certainly just put them to the federal minister, but to start off on this foot where, what kind of slippery slope are we starting here?
Well, I would say we're making exactly the same decision as the federal government did. The federal government made the decision to hold the carbon tax payments for heating fuel, which impacts largely Atlantic Canada. What we're saying is we're going to make a similar decision that is going to have an impact on Saskatchewan residents. I don't think anybody can agree with the most recent carve-out that the federal government is applying their carbon taxation policy fair. Most certainly it's not fair to all Canadian families.
The point, though, that the feds have been making in the interim since they made the announcement is that they're targeting some of the most low-income people in the country who are using heating oil, and that heating oil, in fact, is much more expensive than natural gas or electricity to heat your homes. And I'm just going to provide you with some data around that. If you use oil in the province of PEI, it costs you about $48 to produce a gigajoule of heat. Take away the carbon tax, that's $43. If you live in Saskatchewan and use natural gas, it'll cost you a little over $12 to generate the same amount of heat. That includes the carbon tax, but doesn't include the monthly service charges. That is a big disparity. Is it not good public policy in instances where certain parts of the population are facing undue pressure from something like that to address it?
Two things I would say. One, 40% of the natural gas bills for Saskatchewan families, which is largely how we heat our homes, 40% of their bill already is the carbon tax, and the carbon tax alone. Secondarily, by those very same metrics, the dirtier form of how you heat your home, and by the response that the federal government has had. By those very same metrics, they should be pulling then the carbon tax on coal-fired and natural gas-fired electricity in Saskatchewan, and then also paying for our conversion of those electricity sources to something new. That's what they're doing in this space, impacting virtually only Atlantic Canadians to the largest degree.
On the Sask Energy website, it says that the carbon tax increase that happened earlier this year means an increase overall of $67 per year to an average residential bill. The average family of 4 in Saskatchewan gets a rebate that 4 times a year basically adds up to more than $1,300. Is it really necessary, I'll put to you again, Premier, to get a break on that when there is already a rebate that seems to cover that, plus the cost incurred from the extra price of gas, for example?
The rebates don't cover what Saskatchewan residents pay in carbon taxation. In addition to heating their home, they pay carbon taxation on every watt of electricity that they use. They pay carbon tax each and every time they fill their vehicles in what is a fairly broad province. And so we don't agree with the policy, never have. But outside of Quebec, largely the policy has been applied relatively fairly across the nation. No one can say that the most recent decisions made by the federal government are in anywhere fair to Canadians, and that, I would say, is largely what a federal government is there to do, is to govern on behalf of all Canadian families, all Canadian individuals, not by their own admission, saying if you elect more Liberals in the prairie provinces, you might get a carbon tax carve-out on how you heat your home. I would say, by that same metric, if we elected less Liberals across the nation of Canada, we'd have the problem solved as well.
Is there a way, though, to address what you view as an injustice here that does not involve pulling the lever that you are? Is there an interim measure, for example, a conversation that you could have with the Prime Minister or with one of his delegates on this file in the interim to try and convince them otherwise before putting this idea of not collecting tax through the legislature, for example?
One would hope so. One would hope that the federal government would listen not just to myself, but to a number of other premiers that have been calling for carbon tax fairness and calling for an end to this carbon tax crisis that is being created by this federal government in the decisions that they are making that are very regional in nature, appear to be, and admitted by their minister, very political in nature, to extend the pause on carbon tax to how we heat homes across this nation. But that won't provide fairness for all Saskatchewan families. The only way to provide fairness for all Canadian families is for the federal government to act and to extend this pause that has been ill-conceived, I think, and very political, extend it to all Canadian families. That's what we're asking for. That's what other premiers are asking for, is that very fairness to all Canadian families.
Premier, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vash.